She brought the Mafia boss a free coffee by noon. 4 black cars waited outside her building. Dawn in Port Garrison is less a sunrise and more an admission of defeat. The light doesn't climb over the shipyard cranes. It seeps through the smog like dirty water, painting everything in shades of rust and charcoal. The salt air is so thick you can chew it. It caked the windows of harbor and ash, a layer of grime and frost that blurred the early longshoremen into hunched ghosts. Lena Vo was wiping down the espresso machine for the last time that morning, the smell of burnt beans clinging to my apron. My shift had technically ended 20 minutes ago, but Mrs. Petrov, the owner, was in the back counting pennies and praying the register balanced. The warmth of the cafe was the only thing holding back the damp East Coast chill. The bell above the door chimed, a thin, tired sound. It wasn't a regular. Our regulars were dock workers with hands like cured leather and cops grabbing bitter black coffee. This man moved differently. He didn't walk in. He materialized, slipping through the door as if the air parted for him. He moved with a silence that was louder than any noise, a surgical quiet. He wore a matte black suit that seemed to drink the weak morning light. Rain, or maybe just the harbor mist, clung to the cuffs of his sleeves. He didn't look at the menu board, and he just stood at the counter, his presence sucking the ambient warmth from the room. I felt the tiny hairs on my arms stand up. This was Luca Barzini. I'd never seen him in person, but in Port Garrison, you didn't need to. You just knew. He was a story parents told their kids to scare them. Only the story was real and it paid property taxes. I put on my customer service smile, the one that felt like cracking plaster. "What can I get for you?" His eyes met mine. They weren't cold. Cold is passive. His eyes were active, assessing, like a jeweler checking a stone for flaws. He didn't speak for a second, just looked at me, and I felt like I was standing in a spotlight. "Cappuccino," he said finally. His voice was low, a gravel road at midnight. I nodded, my hands moving on autopilot, tamping the grounds, pulling the shot, steaming the milk. I could feel his gaze on my back, a physical weight. I tried to make the foam perfect, a smooth white cap. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was just instinct, the need to do something right when you feel something is very, very wrong. I placed the cup on the counter. "That'll be $4.50. He didn't reach for his wallet. Instead, he laid a crisp $20 bill on the worn laminate. It lay there, flat and green, a stark contrast to the scarred wood. I looked at the bill, then at him. He was waiting. I pushed the money back toward him, my fingers just brushing the edge. I managed another smile, this one a little more real. "This one's on me," I said, my voice sounding too thin. "It's freezing out there. Everyone deserves something warm." He didn't smile back. He didn't move. He just watched me. His stillness was unnerving. He looked at me as if I were a small, unpredictable flame he was trying to gauge the heat of. Was I harmless? Was I dangerous? He tilted his head, a fraction of an inch. "Nobody deserves it," he murmured, almost to himself. But he took the coffee, his fingers wrapped around the ceramic cup, long and pale against the dark porcelain. Before he could take a sip, the bell above the door didn't chime. It screamed. It was slammed open so hard the glass shivered in its frame. 2 men stumbled in, bringing the smell of stale beer and wet wool with them. These men I knew. Local trash from the North Channel crew, the kind of bottom feeders who thought shaking down small business owners made them predators. One was wiry with twitchy eyes. The other was built like a broken refrigerator. "Ah!" Petrov, the wiry one, yelled, his voice cracking. "We're here for the weekly wellness fee. You're late." "Mrs." Petrov emerged from the back room, her face pale, wiping her hands on her apron. "Please, Stan," she whispered. "Business is slow. I just need a few more days." "Slow," the big one laughed, a wet, hacking sound. He slammed a meaty fist on the counter, rattling the sugar packets. "Looks busy to me. You got customers." He pointed at Luca, who hadn't turned around. "And you got this little thing," the wiry one, Stan, said, his gaze landing on me. He leered, and a knot of cold dread tightened in my stomach. He took a step toward the register, meaning to go around the counter toward Mrs. Petrov. I didn't think. I just moved. I stepped sideways, blocking his path, putting myself between him and my boss. My heart was a trapped bird against my ribs. She said she needs more time. I said. My voice shook, but it was firm. Stan's eyes narrowed. What did you say, sweetheart? You getting in the way? That's not smart. He reached for me, his grimy hand closing into a fist. The cafe went silent, not just quiet, but dead silent. The hiss of the espresso machine, the hum of the cooler, even the traffic outside, it all vanished, sucked into a vacuum. Luca Barzini hadn't moved. He hadn't turned. He had simply lifted his eyes from his cup and was looking at the two men in the mirror behind the bar. It was just a look, but it was enough. The air pressure in the room changed. Stan froze, his hand halfway to me. The big one, who had been grinning, suddenly looked like he'd swallowed a fishbone. I saw the blood drain from their faces, replaced by a waxy, sick-looking pallor. They knew exactly who was sitting at the bar. Stan slowly, very slowly, lowered his hand. We'll be back, he stammered, not looking at me, his eyes locked on Luca's reflection. We'll talk later, Petrov. They backed out of the cafe, stumbling over each other, the big one pulling the wiry one by the jacket. The door swung shut, and the sounds of Port Garrison rushed back in, muffled and gray. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. My knees felt weak. Mrs. Petrov was leaning against the doorframe to the back room, one hand over her mouth. I turned back to the counter, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the cleaning rag. I started wiping down the machine, focusing on the metal, on the repetitive motion. 1 circle, 2 circles, just keep wiping. I thought he was gone, but when I looked up, Luca Barzini was standing, placing his empty cup on the counter. He looked at me. That same intense, unreadable expression. Then he set something small and white on the counter. A business card. It was thick. Heavy linen stock, impossibly white. It just said Barzini Group in stark black letters. No phone number, no address. Just a name that was also a territory. Thank you for the coffee, he said, his voice that same low rumble. He turned and walked out, the bell chiming softly, respectfully, behind him. I stared at the card for a long time before my fingers would work. I slipped it into my apron pocket. It felt heavier than a block of steel. By 11:58 a.m., my shift was long over and the adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the familiar bone-deep weariness. I walked the 6 blocks back to my building, the Pier 13 walk-ups. It was a crumbling brick tenement that smelled of damp plaster and boiled cabbage, but it was home. I turned the corner onto my street, fumbling in my pocket for my keys, and I stopped cold. My heart didn't just drop, it plummeted. 4 of them, 4 black SUVs, parked along the curb like a row of polished exclamation points. They were gleaming, immaculate, and screamed money and power. They didn't belong in this neighborhood of cracked pavement and overflowing dumpsters. They looked like predators that had wandered into a petting zoo. Men in dark suits stood by the cars, not talking, just watching. They stood at ease, but it was the relaxed posture of a panther, ready to move in a blur. One of them saw me. He straightened, touched his ear, and then walked toward me. He was polite, but his politeness was a weapon. "Miss Linevo?" he asked. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "Moe, mister. Barzini insisted we see you home safely." He gestured toward my building's entrance, where another of his men was already standing. He was concerned after the incident this morning. I looked at the men, at the black cars, at the way the few neighbors on the street scurried past, their eyes on the ground. I understood. In that sickening, heart-stopping instant, the coffee, the free coffee, it wasn't a transaction, it was an investment. I had, without knowing it, bought myself a guardian. I had bought myself a monster. That simple gesture had bought me a shield, and I knew. I just knew. It had also bought me a storm. My phone vibrated in my pocket. I pulled it out, my hand still shaking. A series of texts, all from my landlord, Mr. Calder. Don't come home. I'm serious, Lena. Stay away. There are people here, asking for you. They weren't nice. Just don't come back. I looked at the text, then at the man from the SUV, then at the entrance to my building. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here. It was waiting on my staircase. I clutched my keys so hard the metal bit into my palm. The man from the SUV waited patiently. He knew I had no other choice. For the first time in my life, I thought about borrowing a stranger's power. I thought about Luca Barzini. And I thought about the price. Night fell on Port Garrison like a slammed door. I had been in the back of the SUV for hours, sitting in silence as the city's gray afternoon bled into a bruised twilight. The polite man who had collected me from my building hadn't spoken a word. He just drove. The ride so smooth I could have been floating. We weren't at the piers anymore. The smell of salt and fish had been replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of downtown money. The SUV slid to a stop. My original phone, the one with Calder's frantic texts, was a dead brick in my pocket. The man in the front seat passed me a new one, a slim, dark device. It was already on. A single text message glowed on the screen. Get out of the car. I looked at the driver, and he nodded once, his face impassive. I opened the door and stepped onto a sidewalk made of dark, polished stone. The building in front of me wasn't brick and grime. It was a sheer cliff of steel and glass that disappeared into the low-hanging clouds, etched into the massive glass doors. A minimalist logo, a stylized anchor, its flukes sharp as knives, the Barzini Exchange. The lobby was a cathedral of silence. The floors were black marble, so polished I could see the distorted reflection of the recessed lights far above. Men in suits stood at attention, 2 by the door, 2 by the elevator bank. They weren't guards, they were statues, perfectly tailored, their faces blank and calm. The only sound was the faint, expensive hiss of the ventilation. One of the men by the elevator inclined his head. I walked toward him, my worn sneakers squeaking faintly on the marble. I felt like a stray dog in a palace. He pressed the button. The doors slid open silently, and he gestured me inside. He didn't get in with me. I rose alone, the numbers climbing fast, my stomach left somewhere on the ground floor. The doors opened on the 30th floor. This wasn't an office, it was a nerve center. The entire floor was open, with glass walls overlooking the glittering, wet sprawl of Port Garrison. People moved with quiet purpose between workstations, their faces illuminated by the glow of data. A massive screen on one wall showed a detailed map of the city, alive with moving dots and shifting sectors. A man detached himself from the shadows and approached me. He was sharp, thin, and wore a suit that probably cost more than my entire apartment. His smile was thin, too, and didn't touch his eyes. Miss Vo, I'm Ari Malden. He was Luca Barzini's chief of staff, his consigliere, the brain that ran the machine. Water coffee. I'm fine, I lied. My throat felt like sandpaper. He gestured to the massive map. The North Channel crew, he said, his voice as dry as old paper. Ambitious, but sloppy. They've decided to expand their revenue stream. They're pressing every independent business on the waterfront for a new pier fee. His finger tapped a small, blinking red dot on the map. Harbor and Ash, your little cafe. They weren't just there for misses. Petrov's savings. They were testing the waters, seeing who would pay, who would run. He paused, his sharp eyes flicking to me, and who might have protection. A cold realization washed over me. They were there because of him, because he was there. No, Ari said. They were there because they're greedy. His presence was just inconvenient for them and fortunate for you. My mind was racing, trying to connect the pieces, the men at the cafe, the men at my building, my landlord. His name is Calder. He's trying to evict everyone in my building. He said there were people looking for me. Calder, Ari mused, typing the name into a terminal. A file popped up almost instantly. Ah, yes, a small-time parasite, deep in debt to the wrong people. He's working with the city. I pressed, the words tumbling out. Some department, the Urban Integrity Bureau, the UIB, they're citing everyone for violations, trying to condemn the buildings, clear us out. For the first time, Ari Malden's thin smile widened into something that almost looked like genuine amusement. He let out a small, quiet laugh. The Urban Integrity Bureau, how perfect. He turned to face me fully. Miss Vo, the UIB isn't the city. It's just another shell, a polite mask for the same enemy. The North Channel crew handles the muscle. The UIB provides the paperwork. They don't want to clean up the piers. They want to own them. The main door to the vast room opened, and the low hum of activity ceased. It didn't just get quiet. The very air seemed to thin. Luca Barzini entered. He was in a different suit from this morning, a dark charcoal gray so fine it seemed to ripple as he moved. He was slowly, meticulously, pulling off a pair of thin black leather gloves, finger by finger. His eyes found me instantly, ignoring Ari, ignoring everyone else. That same intense, assessing gaze. He stopped a few feet from me. You gave me a coffee, and he said, his voice that same low gravel, I am giving you safety. He took a step closer, and I had to fight the urge to step back. But safety has rules, my rules. His eyes held mine, and I felt pinned. You listen to me. You follow me. You do not speak to men like the ones from this morning. You do not try to be brave. Understood. I was caught between the genuine terror his presence inspired and a strange, unwelcome surge of gratitude. Understood, I whispered. He gave a sharp nod, then turned to his chief of staff. Ari, secure her apartment. New locks, tactical alarms on every window and the door. Full camera coverage of the hallway, the stairwell, and the street. I want our people in that building. Top floor and ground floor before morning. Done, Ari said, already typing into his phone. The ride back to the Pier 13 walk-ups was a blur. The black cars were still there, but they weren't just parked, they commanded the street. When I walked into my building, the polite man flanking me, I saw two new faces in the lobby, men who looked like they'd been carved from the same stone as the ones downtown. When I reached my floor, the door to my tiny apartment was open. A team of 3 men in dark, functional uniforms was inside. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They weren't handymen. They were ghosts. They drilled and installed a new, heavy-duty deadbolt. They placed tiny, almost invisible sensors at the corners of my single window. They affixed a camera, no bigger than a coin, above my door, its lens aimed at the hallway. They were done in less than 15 minutes. As they filed out, the last one paused and handed me a new phone, a simple, heavy, featureless black brick. From Mr. Barzini, he said, his voice flat. It is the only one that will work in your apartment. All other signals are now blocked. He closed the door, and I heard the solid, heavy thud of the new lock seating itself. My room, my tiny sanctuary, was now a fortress. It was also, I realized, a cage. The burner phone lit up in my hand. The screen glowed. There was only one contact, a single letter L. As if summoned, the phone buzzed, the vibration harsh in the silence. It was a call from L. I stared at it for a second, my heart hammering. I pressed the button. Lena, his voice was in my ear, as clear and close as if he were standing next to me. If anyone touches you, you call me. If anyone so much as looks at you in a way you do not like, you call me. There was a pause. Do not be a hero. There are no heroes left in this city. The line went dead. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. The sounds of the harbor, the foghorns, and the groaning of the piers, usually a comfort, now sounded like warnings. I sat on my bed, the new phone heavy in my lap. One of the men had left a laptop on my small table. I opened it. The screen was already on. displaying the same map I had seen in Luca's office, the map of Port Garrison. The waterfront was covered in those small, angry red dots, the North Channel's collection points. They were spreading, a rash moving inland from the water. I reached into the pocket of the jeans I'd been wearing all day. My fingers closed around the business card, Barzini Group. I pulled it out, rubbing the thick, embossed cardstock. It wasn't a piece of paper. It was a marker, a temporary visa into a forbidden world, a place of shadows and steel. A hard, cold knot of resolve formed in my stomach. I would not just be a damsel in high-tech distress. If I was going to be forced to stand under this man's dark, suffocating umbrella, I would find a way to pay my own way. I would pay this debt. I looked back at the screen. Calder, the North Channel crew, the UIB. Ari had said they were connected. My mind, sharp from lack of sleep and too much adrenaline, finally made the jump. It wasn't just extortion and evictions. It was one big, dirty machine. The thought landed, sudden and clear as a gunshot. The UIB wasn't just clearing residents for the redevelopment. The UIB was a front. They were faking the housing violations, condemning the buildings, and using the official-looking redevelopment projects to launder the North Channel's dirty money. The city wasn't just corrupt. It was a wholly owned subsidiary. And I, Lena Vo, had just served a free cup of coffee to the man who was, in all likelihood, their single biggest competitor. I was at the espresso machine before 6 a.m. I had walked to Harbor and Ash in the gray, pre-dawn light, flanked at a distance by two men in dark coats I didn't know. They had been in the lobby of my building when I left. They never spoke to me, but they were there, a silent, moving perimeter. The burner phone in my pocket felt like a stone. The cafe was tense. Mrs. Petrov kept dropping spoons, her hands shaking. The regulars, the few old longshoremen who came in before their shifts, nursed their mugs in silence. They knew. In Port Garrison, news traveled through the pavement. They knew the North Channel crew had been in, and they knew who had made them leave. The air was thick with unspoken questions. I was pulling a shot, the bitter smell of the grounds cutting through the tension, when the bell above the door slammed open. It was them, Stan, the wiry one, and the broken refrigerator, but this time they weren't alone. A third man was with them, one I hadn't seen. He was short, with a bulldog's build and dead, flat eyes. He was the one in charge. The other two were just his dogs. "Morning, Petrov," the bulldog sneered, spreading his arms wide. "We're here to collect, with interest, for yesterday's misunderstanding." Stan grinned, showing yellow teeth. "Yeah, misunderstanding." He took a step toward the counter, his eyes landing on me. "And maybe an apology from your little girl here." My heart was a fist in my chest. "Mrs." Petrov whimpered, backing against the pastry case. The bulldog laughed. "Last chance. Old woman, pay the pier fee, or we start taking inventory, starting with the girl." I wiped my hands on my apron. My fingers were numb. I pulled the heavy black burner phone from my pocket. My thumb fumbled on the keypad, but I managed it. One word. Now. I hit send. The bulldog saw the phone. "Who are you calling, sweetheart?" "The cops. Go ahead. They'll be here in an hour. We'll be done in 5 minutes. He took another step. I could smell the stale cigarettes on him. And then, a sound, or rather, the absence of one. The quiet, hydraulic hiss of expensive brakes. Outside the salt-stained window, the street was suddenly, impossibly full of black metal. 4 SUVs. They hadn't just arrived. They had materialized, sliding into the curb in a perfect, synchronized line, as if they were one machine. The precision was terrifying. The bulldog and his crew heard it, too. They turned. Stan's grin faltered. The passenger door of the lead SUV opened. Luca Barzini stepped out. He wasn't rushed. He was wearing a dark blue suit today, and he took a moment to adjust the cuff of his left sleeve. He looked at the men in the window, his face unreadable, then walked to the cafe door. The bell chimed softly. He didn't look at the North Channel crew. He walked right past them, as if they were furniture, and came to the bar. His eyes found mine. "Espresso, Lena," he said, his voice a low calm in the storm-filled room. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the portafilter, but I didn't. I locked it in, pulled the shot. My movements jerky. The dark, rich liquid dripped into the tiny cup. I placed it on the counter, my hand trembling so much the cup rattled in its saucer. Luca didn't take it. Not yet. He turned. Slowly. He reached over to an empty table, grasped the back of a wooden chair, and pulled it out. The sound of the chair legs scraping against the linoleum was like a scream in the silence. He sat down, facing the three men, then he picked up his espresso, took a small, appreciative sip, and placed it back on the saucer. The bulldog, his face turning a blotchy red, puffed himself up. "You lost, old man. This is private business. Get out." Luca looked at him. He didn't seem angry. He seemed tired. He picked up a napkin, delicately wiped a tiny fleck of foam from his upper lip, and placed the napkin on the table. "Your bill," Luca said, his voice so quiet they had to lean in to hear it, "was sent to the wrong address." Stan and the bulldog looked at each other, confused. The big one just growled, clenching his fists. "What the hell are you talking about?" the bulldog demanded. "This establishment," Luca said, gesturing to the cafe with one pale hand, "is now under the protection of the Barzini Group, which means your services are no longer required. You will leave." Stan laughed, a short, barking sound. "You and what army, pal?" Luca didn't look at his own men, who were now filtering in, standing by the door, blocking the only exit. He looked past the bulldog, past Stan. His eyes found Ari Malden, who'd been standing just inside the doorway the whole time. The two groups were standing on the black and white tiles of the cafe floor. They were exactly one tile apart. The tension was a physical thing, a high-frequency hum that made my teeth ache. Ari, without looking at anyone, simply lifted his right hand and snapped his fingers. A clean, sharp, final sound. Outside, a low, mechanical whir. I saw it. The traffic camera on the pole across the street, the one that had been spray painted over and broken for as long as I'd worked here. It was clean, and it was moving. It pivoted, its black lens zeroing in, staring straight through the glass window of Harbor and Ash. A small, bright red light clicked on. Ari smiled, his thin, bloodless smile. "Every action has a witness," he said to the bulldog, "and a corresponding case file. Please continue. The district attorney is enjoying the show." The bulldog's face went purple. This was an ambush, a public humiliation. He was a cornered animal. "I don't care who's watching," he roared, and his hand dove inside his thick jacket. I saw the glint of steel, a knife. Luca didn't flinch. He didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't even stand. He just sighed, a small sound of profound disappointment. With his left hand, he slowly, almost lazily, pulled back the right side of his suit vest. He wasn't showing them a gun. It was just an emblem, pinned to the silk lining. It was small, matte black, and seemed to swallow the light, a circle, with a dark, swirling pattern inside, the black current. I had no idea what it meant, but the bulldog did. The blood drained from his face. It went from purple to a waxy, fish-belly white. His hand, the one inside his jacket, froze solid. He stared at the emblem, his mouth open, a small, choked sound coming from his throat. He knew what it was, and he knew what it meant. It meant he wasn't just robbing a cafe, he was trespassing on the property of a king. Slowly, his empty hand came out of his jacket. He raised both hands, palms out. "No disrespect," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. "We didn't know. We're good. We're leaving." Luca just looked at him. "You are not leaving," he said, his voice still quiet. "You are gone. Get out of my city." The three of them scrambled, stumbling over each other to get out the door. Stan tripped over the welcome mat and fell to his knees, crawling for a second before the big one hauled him up. They piled out onto the sidewalk and ran for a beat-up sedan parked down the block. An engine screamed to life. Tires smoked on the wet pavement. The smell of burnt rubber filled the cafe. And then, silence. Luca calmly finished his espresso. Placing the empty cup back on the saucer, the regulars in the booths let out a collective breath. Mrs. Petrov was leaning against the counter, crying silently into her apron. Luca stood. He walked to the counter and looked at me. The whole cafe was watching us. "Do you owe them anything?" he asked. I shook my head, my throat dry. "No," I managed. Just my rent, and I guess the whole city." Ari stepped forward. He was holding a checkbook from a bank I'd never heard of, its cover embossed with the words Skylane Holdings. He opened it and clicked a heavy, expensive-looking pen. Luca took the pen. "Ari has acquired Mr. Calder's debt ledger." He scribbled a signature on a blank check. The sound of the nib on the paper was the only sound in the room. He tore it out and handed it not to me, but to Ari. "Buy it, all of it, the building." He turned back to me. "Your debt is mine now." A spike of hot, defiant anger shot through my fear. "I don't need a new landlord," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "I'm not swapping one master for another." He looked at me for a long moment, and it was that look again, gauging the heat. "It is not a debt, Lena," he said, his voice low. "It is leverage. Calder is the string. We are going to use him to pull down the UIB's entire dirty curtain." He held my gaze. He wasn't asking me. He was telling me what was going to happen next. "You will come with me. You know the tenants, you know the building. You are the face of this." I looked at Mrs. Petrov, who was already nodding, her face full of teary gratitude. I looked at the door where those men had fled. I looked at Luca, this man who moved like a shadow and commanded armies with a quiet word. "I'll go," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I have one condition." He raised a single, perfect eyebrow. "No blood," I said, nodding toward the espresso machine, the pastry case. "Not here. This place is clean. You keep it that way." A small, fractional smile touched the corner of his mouth. It was there and gone in a heartbeat. "In your cafe, Lena," he said. "I'm always quiet." He gestured to the door. One of his men held it open, a wall of black wool. I untied my apron, my hands finally steady, and laid it on the counter. As I walked past the tables, old Sal, the dock worker who never said more than "black 2 sugars," looked up at me. He didn't speak, but he met my eyes, and he nodded, just once. It wasn't a nod for a waitress, it was a nod of respect. I stepped out of the warmth of the cafe and into the cold, bright morning, the door of a black SUV waiting for me. I had just stopped being the girl who serves the coffee. I had become the girl who stands with the man who commands the storm. Luca Barzini's penthouse was not a home. It was a fortress in the clouds. It occupied the entire top floor of the Exchange building, a seamless expanse of glass and dark, polished wood that overlooked the whole of Port Garrison Bay. The lights of the distant cargo ships were like scattered jewels on black velvet. The only sound was the wind, a high, lonely cry against the glass. He had said nothing on the elevator ride up, a silent 40-second ascent that felt like a lifetime. He just watched me, that unnerving, quiet assessment. Now, he led me to a kitchen that was less a kitchen and more a gleaming, chrome laboratory. "You drink Americanos," he stated. It wasn't a question. I just nodded. "How did you know?" "You're a purist, but you have no patience for the ceremony of a pour-over. You want the shot, but you want it to last." He turned away, rolling up the sleeves of his white shirt, revealing strong, pale forearms dusted with fine, dark hair. He moved to a machine that looked like a piece of vintage sculpture, all brass levers and polished copper, a manual press. His movements were a ritual, the precise measurement of the beans, the metallic shing of the hand grinder, the way he tamped the grounds with a focused, almost reverent pressure. There was no wasted motion. It was the same surgical quiet he'd had when he walked into the cafe. It was the way he did everything. He handed me a heavy ceramic mug. The coffee was black, hot, and perfect. We stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the city that was our battlefield. "You're not afraid of men like that," he said, not looking at me, his gaze fixed on the flashing red light of a distant buoy. "The ones in the cafe, you were scared, but you weren't afraid. Why?" The coffee warmed my hands, but the question chilled me. I looked at our reflections in the glass. Me, small and lost in the vast, empty room. Him, a solid, dark shape beside me. "My father," I said, the words tasting like ash. "He drank. When he was deep in it, he was a different person, loud and mean, and his hands were fast." I took a sip of the coffee. I learned to be small. I used to hide under the kitchen table, in the space between the wall and the flower bin. I'd make myself so quiet I could feel my own heart beating against the floorboards. I learned that loud is usually weak. It's the quiet you have to watch out for. I looked at him. It's the quiet ones who are dangerous. He was silent for a long time, the only sound the distant moan of a foghorn from the harbor. 2 a.m., he said, his voice a low murmur, almost to himself. "Every night, 2 a.m., that foghorn sounds. When I was a boy, that was the signal. It meant the docks were being cleared." He looked at me then, his eyes dark, holding a history I couldn't even begin to understand. It was the marker. It meant my father was at work. It meant I could sleep. He turned back to the window. "I still wake up at 2 a.m., every night." We stood there, two ghosts in a glass tower, sharing secrets in the dark. The city below felt miles away. A sudden gust of wind hit the building, a low, percussive thump, and the sea air bleeding through the seals on the balcony door was sharp and cold. I shivered, my thin sweater suddenly useless. I didn't see him move, but suddenly he was beside me. He draped something heavy and impossibly soft over my shoulders. It was a cashmere robe, dark gray, and it smelled faintly of him, cedar and something clean and metallic, like the air after a lightning strike. His fingers brushed the skin of my neck, just below my collar. They paused. It wasn't a caress, it was a hesitation. A single, charged moment of contact. His fingers were warm against my cold skin. I stopped breathing. I could hear my heart, a frantic, stupid drumming in my chest, loud in the silence. Then, just as slowly, he pulled his hand away. I clutched the robe around me, pulling the scent of him closer. I turned to face him. He was closer than I thought. I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. We were on the balcony now, the wind pulling at my hair, the vast, cold emptiness of the night sky all around us. The air was sharp with salt. He didn't move. He just looked at me, his gaze traveling from my eyes to my mouth and back. It was a question, asked in perfect, terrifying silence. My heart was doing that stupid thing again, that trapped bird flutter, but I didn't back away. I didn't look down. I nodded, just once. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to retreat. His hand came up, not to my face, but to my lower back, resting there. It was a gesture of guidance, not possession, respectful. His other hand rested on the stone railing. Then his lips touched mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not the kind that steals your breath. It was a kiss of discovery. It was slow and warm and hesitant. His lips were firm and dry. He kissed me, then pulled back, just an inch, his eyes still closed. I let out a shaky breath, and I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a smile on his face. I smiled, too. I leaned in this time, and the second kiss was deeper. I felt his hand on my back tighten, just a fraction, pulling me closer. My hands came up and rested on his chest, on the fine wool of his suit. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart under my palm, a stark contrast to my own. The wind howled around us, but in that small space, there was just the warmth of his mouth and the clean scent of his skin. He whispered something against my lips, so low the wind almost stole it. "I'm here." That was all, just 2 words, And I melted. The strength that had held me upright for so long, the defiant anger, the fear, it all just dissolved, leaving me weak-kneed and trembling for a completely different reason. He broke the kiss and led me inside, away from the wind. The silence of the apartment was back, but it was different now, charged. He didn't let go of my hand. He led me through the dark living space, past a massive, unlit fireplace, toward the bedroom. We stopped at the edge of the bed. The room was dark, illuminated only by the cold lights of the city far below. He turned me to face him. He raised a hand, his thumb brushing slowly across my lower lip. The fire was there, a low, steady burn deep in my stomach. I saw it in his eyes, too. A dark, controlled hunger. The air between us was electric. He leaned in, and I thought he was going to kiss me again. But he stopped, his forehead resting against mine. We just stood there, breathing each other's air, our bodies not quite touching, the energy crackling between us. It was me who broke the spell. Not like this, I whispered, my voice shaky. Not rushed. He pulled back, his eyes searching mine. I don't want to be a consequence, I said, trying to find the words. I don't want to be something that just happens. He nodded, a slow, understanding gesture. The fire in his eyes didn't go out, but it banked, settling into a patient, watchful glow. We stood there, forehead to forehead, letting the moment settle, letting the fire burn steady instead of fast. He took a step back, putting a small, safe distance between us. Boundaries, Lena, he said. Boundaries, Ray, I agreed. No lies. Not about the danger. I need to know what I'm walking into. Agreed, he said immediately. And I will not ask you to witness my business. I will not involve you in any decision that requires violence. Good, I said, pulling the robe tighter. That's good. He walked to a dark, polished dresser and picked something up. He held it out to me. It looked like a sleek, expensive fountain pen, all black metal and silver trim. What is it? A voice recorder, he said. The microphone is here, at the top. You click the cap, it starts recording. It's good for 48 hours, and it uploads to a secure server. Even if they find it and destroy it, we have the file. He placed it in my hand. It was cool and heavy. If the UIB comes, if Calder comes, if anyone comes to your door, you click this before you open it. The truth, Lena, is the cleanest weapon we have. I stared at the pen. This tiny, secret weapon. The truth, it gave me an idea. A bad one. There's something else, I said. Something I didn't tell Ari. He waited, his face impassive. Calder, the night before all this started, he came to my apartment. He said I was behind on rent, which was a lie. He had a paper. He forced me to sign it. What paper? Luca's voice was flat, but a muscle in his jaw twitched. It was an addendum to my lease. It said I agreed to a full compliance inspection by the Urban Integrity Bureau. It gave them the right to enter my apartment at any time, with or without me. It had a clause that said they could seize and destroy any non-compliant items. Meaning everything you own, Luca finished. Yes, and it said if they found any violations, I had 24 hours to vacate or be arrested for trespassing. Luca Barzini was very, very still. He looked at me, not with pity, but with a new, cold calculation. He looked at me for a long, long time. The city lights reflected in his dark eyes. Then that, he said, his voice ablaze in the quiet room, is what we will use. He turned and walked back toward the kitchen, and I followed. They think they have a key to your door. They think they can come in, destroy your life, and throw you away, all with a neat, legal piece of paper. He picked up his empty espresso cup. So we will let them. We will let them walk right into their own trap. We will turn their quiet little inspection into a public trial. He looked at me, and the last traces of the man who had kissed me on the balcony were gone, replaced by the strategist, the king. They want your room. Lena will give it to them, and we'll make sure the entire city is watching when they take it. He placed his cup on the counter next to my empty Americano mug. 2 empty cups. I knew, in that moment, that the first free coffee I'd given him had opened a door I could never close, and this second one, the one he'd made for me, it was locking us together. On the same side of a war I was just beginning to understand. The rumor hit Pier 13 like a winter fever. It started as a whisper in the hallways, a printed flyer official-looking, with the UIB logo tucked under doors in the middle of the night. Operation Clean Sweep, a full-scale, district-wide inspection and enforcement action, starting in 48 hours. Panic was immediate. By nightfall, the stairwells of my building were crowded with people hauling suitcases and cardboard boxes. Mrs. Gonzalez from 3B was weeping in the hall, her grandchildren clinging to her legs. People were selling furniture on the sidewalk for pennies, desperate to get anything before the UIB declared it non-compliant and destroyed it. It was a manufactured refugee crisis, orchestrated to break our spirit before the first van ever arrived. "Let them panic," Ari had said, his voice clipped and cold over the burner phone. "Fear makes people clumsy. We will be organized." He was true to his word. While the residents scrambled, Luca's people moved with quiet precision. Vans, not black SUVs, but anonymous white panel vans, arrived in the dead of night. They weren't filled with men in suits. They were filled with folding tables, hot coffee, and moving boxes. Ari had set up a community assistance tent at the end of the block. He'd even designed escape routes, coordinating with local shelters to quietly move the elderly and disabled residents to safe, temporary housing before the UIB could even set foot on the street. My part was different. Ari had sent a file to the laptop in my apartment. It was a perfectly formatted class action complaint drafted by a Port Garrison Tenants' Rights Initiative, a pro bono legal firm that didn't exist until yesterday. It named the UIB, the city, and Mr. Calder as defendants, alleging conspiracy, harassment, and illegal eviction practices. My key contribution was the evidence. I'd clicked the cap on the recorder pen Luca had given me, just as he'd taught. I spoke my name, the date, and then I retold, in cold, clear detail, every word of Calder's threat, how he'd forced me to sign the addendum, how he'd promised the UIB would destroy my property. I uploaded the audio file, attached it to the complaint, and, with a click, filed it electronically with the Port Garrison District Court, a public record, a legal shot fired before the physical battle began. They came in the morning, 10 a.m., sharp. They didn't come with sirens. They came with the sterile, quiet menace of bureaucracy. 2 white vans, their sides emblazoned with the bright blue, optimistic logo of the Urban Integrity Bureau. A half-dozen men in matching blue windbreakers spilled out, carrying clipboards and crowbars. Leading them was a woman in a crisp, gray pantsuit that looked completely out of place in our grimy neighborhood. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, and her face was a mask of bland, professional authority. This had to be Mara Keel. Near the community tent, 2 people with handheld cameras and press badges that read Nimbus Media started filming. Their demeanor, that of earnest, hopeful community bloggers. Keel ignored them. I was waiting. I stood on the top step of my building, blocking the entrance, just as I had at the cafe. My hands were in my pockets. One hand was wrapped around the heavy burner phone. The other had its thumb on the cap of the recorder pen. Click! Keel marched up the steps, her heels clicking. "Ma'am, you'll need to step aside. This building is scheduled for a full compliance inspection." "On what grounds?" I asked. My voice was surprisingly steady. The small crowd of remaining tenants on the sidewalk grew quiet, watching. She sighed, a put-upon sound. "We have a signed addendum from a tenant authorizing entry for inspection. Now, please move." "I am that tenant," I said, Lena Vo, "and I am rescinding my signature, which was obtained under duress. This action is illegal. We filed an injunction with the district court this morning, case number 942B. Keel's professional mask twitched. She'd not expected that. She looked at me, really looked at me. For the first time, This is a civil matter. We are executing a lawful order. Move, or you will be arrested for obstruction." "Obstruction of what? Where is your warrant?" I pressed. "We don't need a warrant," once she snapped, her patience gone. "We have tenant consent, which I just told you was rescinded. My lawyer has advised me not to allow you entry without a judicial order." Keel stared at me, her eyes cold. She knew she was in a gray area, but she was used to people rolling over. She raised her hand and gestured to the two men with crowbars. "The lock is non-compliant. Remove it." That was the moment. The men stepped forward. Luca had kept his promise. His men were nowhere to be seen. There were no black suits, no visible weapons. The street was just me, my neighbors, the fake news crew, and the UIB. But as the first man jammed his crowbar into my door frame, I heard it, a high, thin whine, like a distant dentist's drill. I looked up. High above the building, a tiny black dot hung in the air. A second dot hovered over the street. The cameras were in place. The live stream was active. Just as the wood of my door jamb began to splinter, one of the Nimbus media reporters, a young woman with a microphone, suddenly gasped. She was looking at her phone. We're getting a breaking report," she said, her voice amplified by her small speaker. This can't be right." Mara Keel paused, annoyed by the interruption. The man with the crowbar stopped. "Nimbus Media is switching to a live feed. From inside a city warehouse," the reporter announced, her voice filled with confusion. Ari had made his move. In the crowd, phones began to light up. People were gasping. A man near me turned his screen, and I saw it. The feed wasn't from our street. It was shaky. Handheld footage from inside a dark, massive warehouse. A man, his voice digitally disguised, was whispering to the camera. "This is the unofficial treasury of the Urban Integrity Bureau," the voiceover hissed, as the camera panned over stacks of shrink-wrapped cash, artwork, and crates of electronics. "This is where they bring the items they seize from residents. This is where they hide the money." Mara Keel's face went white. She knew that warehouse. This was impossible. Her hand shot to her pocket, pulling out not a regular cell phone, but a thick, heavy satellite phone, a secure line. She barked into it, her voice low and frantic. "Who authorized this? Shut it down. Shut down the feed. Get our people out of there. It's a setup." She was too panicked to notice that the main Nimbus camera had zoomed in, capturing her face in a tight, desperate close-up. And then, Ari delivered the final, killing blow. On the phone screens in the crowd, the feed split. On one side, the secret warehouse. On the other, Mara Keel's face, and beneath her, in stark white letters, subtitles began to appear, transcribing her secure call for the entire world to read. "Calling Secure Channel 4, shut it down, it's a setup. Get our people out of there." She had publicly confirmed that the warehouse was hers. She had confessed. A man in the crowd shouted, "Thieves, you're thieves!" Keel looked at the phone in her hand, then at the camera, her expression crumbling from authority to raw, animal panic. She knew. She was finished. We are pulling back," she stammered, shoving the phone back into her pocket. "This inspection will be postponed, pending legal review." She and her men all but ran for their vans, the sound of the crowbar clattering on the pavement drowned out by the first, hesitant cheer from the residents. As the vans sped away, the cheer grew into a roar. People were hugging Mrs. Gonzalez was laughing through her tears. I leaned against the splintered doorframe, my legs shaking so badly I could barely stand. The drones were gone. The Nimbus media crew was interviewing ecstatic tenants. Calder, I noticed, was nowhere to be seen. His apartment was dark. He had vanished. We had won. We had used the truth as a weapon, and it had worked. But as the adrenaline faded, a cold dread settled back in. This was a clean win, a legal win, a win on camera. The North Channel crew didn't care about cameras. They didn't use lawyers, and they didn't file paperwork. We had publicly humiliated their partners. We had cut off their money laundering machine. This wasn't over. This was just the opening move. The real counterattack, the one without rules or witnesses, was still to come. That night, the burner phone in my pocket buzzed. It was a text from Luca. Just one. "They are coming." A few seconds later, another. "Tomorrow. Lena, do not be alone." I was in his kitchen. It was hours later, long after midnight. The city below was a quiet smear of light. I was alone, the adrenaline from the day's victory finally draining away, leaving a hollow, vibrating emptiness behind. I opened the heavy, stainless steel refrigerator, and the cold, pale light cut a perfect square onto the dark floor. I reached for a carton of milk, my hand still shaking. Not from fear this time, but from exhaustion. The click of the elevator door was almost silent, but I heard it. I didn't turn. The refrigerator light was the only illumination in the vast, dark room. I just listened to the soft sounds of his arrival. The whisper of his suit jacket being draped over a chair, the faint slide of silk as he pulled his tie loose from his collar, the small snick of his top button being undone. I poured the milk into a glass, the liquid a ghostly white in the dim light. He didn't speak. I felt him approach, a change in the air behind me, a subtle warmth. Then, his hands were on my waist. They rested there. His fingers spread wide, not pulling me, just holding me, grounding me. I leaned back against his chest, closing my eyes, letting out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since dawn. He lowered his head, his lips brushing the side of my neck, just below my ear. A shiver traced its way down my spine. "You're safe," he whispered, his voice a low rumble that I felt more than heard. I turned in his arms. Slowly, my glass of milk still in my hand, I placed it on the marble counter, the sound echoing slightly in the silence. My front was pressed against his, my skin against the fine cotton of his shirt. I could feel the solid and steady beat of his heart against my own. His eyes searched mine in the half-light. His hands slid from my waist up my back, his palms warm and strong. He drew me closer. The kiss was different this time. It wasn't the hesitant exploration on the balcony, charged with wind and salt. This was slow and deep and sure. It was a promise. My back pressed against the cold steel of the refrigerator as he deepened the kiss, his mouth learning mine. His hand came up to cradle the back of my neck, his thumb tracing the line of my jaw, tilting my head. It was a perfect give and take. Every move he made, I met. Every time he paused, I pressed forward, our breathing synced, becoming one shared, ragged rhythm. The cashmere robe he had given me earlier was still draped over my shoulders. With one slow, deliberate motion, his hand moved from my back and slid it from my shoulder. I watched it fall, a soft gray pool of shadow at our feet. A spoon, left on the counter from my coffee earlier, was nudged by my elbow and clattered into the sink. The sharp sound made us both jolt, and a quiet, shared laugh broke against our lips. We smiled, our faces inches apart. The heat was rising, a slow burn that started deep in my stomach and spread to every nerve ending. The air between us was thick and electric. He leaned in again, his eyes dark, his intent clear. It was a question. All over again. But this time it was not "may I," but "are you ready?" I nodded, my breath catching. And then I stopped. I pressed my hand flat against his chest, and he froze instantly. I leaned my forehead against his, our bodies still pressed together, my fingers tracing the collar of his shirt. "No rush," I whispered, my voice shaky but clear. "I want to remember tonight. I want to remember it by the smell of vanilla from your kitchen and the sound of the dishwasher. Not just as an ending to a day I was terrified." He didn't speak. He just held me. After a long moment, he let out a slow breath and pressed a soft, gentle kiss to my forehead. "Okay," he murmured against my skin. "Okay, Lena." He took my hand and led me from the cold light of the kitchen into the dark living room. We didn't turn on the lights. We sat on the long, low sofa, the city lights providing the only illumination. We just held each other. His arm was around me. my head on his shoulder. My fingers played with the cuff of his shirt. We talked, our voices low, whispers in the dark. I don't know how we got there, but he was telling me about his first real partner, a man he had trusted like a brother, who had sold him out to a rival family for a boat in a bigger territory. He set the meat, Lucas said, his voice flat, his gaze lost in the lights of the cargo ships. I walked in, and they were waiting. It was the first time I learned that blood is not always family, and family is not always loyal. He shifted, turning slightly toward me. He touched his side, just above his hip. He was the one who held me while they did it, to prove his loyalty to them. In the dim light, I could just see it, a faint, silver line against his skin where his shirt had ridden up, a scar. My hand went to it, my fingers tracing the raised, healed skin. It was still tender to the touch. He flinched, just barely, but he didn't pull away. I leaned in and pressed my lips to it. A soft, reverent kiss. A scar, I whispered against his skin, is just a place where the light found a way in. He went completely still. He looked at me, and his eyes were raw, unguarded, in a way I had never seen. He didn't say anything, he just pulled me closer. After a long time, he stood and walked to a small, dark wood box on his desk. He opened it and took something out. He came back and pressed it into my palm. It was metal. It was cold. A key. "What is this?" I asked. "A key," he said, "to the private elevator, to this apartment." He closed my fingers around it. "Home is not a place you have to ask for permission to enter. Lena, it is a place you have a right to open the door." My throat felt tight. I looked at the key, this solid, impossible piece of trust in my hand. I stood up and went to the kitchen, where he kept his stash of coffee beans in glass jars. I found a small bag and a silver marker. I scooped some of the beans from his manual grinder my beans, the ones he'd set aside for my Americanos. I wrote on the side of the bag in my neatest print. "What are you doing?" he asked, coming up behind me. I held it up for him to read. "Lena Blend, for those who are sleepless from fighting for justice." A sound rumbled in his chest. It started low, and then it happened. He laughed. It wasn't the small, fractional smile I'd seen before. It was a real, genuine, unguarded laugh. It was a warm, surprising sound, and it filled the entire room. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It made me forget, for a single perfect second, the foghorns, the UIB, and the entire dark, waiting city. We ended the night on the thick, soft rug in front of the glass wall, a blanket thrown over us. We didn't talk. We just listened to the sound of the wind, watching the tiny lights of the ships moving on the black water. For the first time in my entire life, I felt two things at once, completely happy and completely safe. I must have dozed off. I woke to the sharp, intrusive buzz of a phone. Not Luca's, mine, the burner phone. It was on the coffee table, its screen a harsh, demanding green. A text message from an unknown number. Luca was beside me in an instant, his peacefulness gone, replaced by the predator I knew. I opened the message. "Full moon, Iron Hook Jetty, alone, Lena?" My blood went cold. "It's the North Channel," I whispered. "No," Lucas said, his voice hard. "Keep reading. There's an attachment." I scrolled down. It was a picture. A grainy, nighttime photo of a door. My door. The one at the Pier 13 walk-ups. The one with the new lock he had installed. The one with the splintered wood from Mara Keel's crowbar. And in the corner of the photo, a digital timestamp. It was from tonight, 1:30 a.m. While I was here, while I was safe. Someone had been there. Someone had stood right outside my door and taken that picture. Someone had violated the one place he had secured. I looked at him, my heart hammering. The piece was gone, shattered. Luca's face was carved from stone, his eyes black and cold. He didn't say, "Don't go." He didn't say, "It's a trap." He just looked at the phone, then at me. "Good," he said, his voice a blade. "They've given us the location. We will set the stage. We will let them confess to the entire city. The full moon was 48 hours away. Luca's penthouse was no longer a home. It was a war room. The vast open space hummed with the quiet energy of high-capacity servers. Ari Malden stood before the massive glass wall, which had been transformed into an interactive map of the Port Garrison waterfront, the focal point glowing in stark white lines. Was Iron Hook Jetty. "Operation Saltline," Ari announced, his voice crisp. He looked at me, not Luca. "The jetty is a trap, Lena, and you are the bait. But it is also a theater, and we are setting the stage." He zoomed in on the map. Red icons lit up all around the perimeter. Iron Hook is a bottleneck. One way in, one way out. It's also old, built on a steel framework. We are turning it into an echo box. We've placed parabolic microphones at every piling. We've positioned signal reflectors on the cranes across the channel. Every word spoken on that jetty will be captured, amplified, and recorded. He turned and picked up a dark gray jacket from the sofa. It looked normal, like something I'd wear on a cold night at the docks. It was heavy. "This is for you." He handed it to me. "The lining is a mesh of signal-conducting fibers. It will boost the gain on your transmitter, making you the loudest voice in the box." He tapped a spot on the lapel. "Here, a biometric chip. It will broadcast a steady pulse, a fake heartbeat." "Why?" I asked, my fingers tracing the outline of the hard, tiny device. "Because they will be listening," Ari said. "The North Channel crew, and probably Keel. They will scan for transmissions. They will hear a single, steady heartbeat. They will believe you are alone. They will believe you are vulnerable." "She is vulnerable." Luca's voice cut in. He'd been standing by the window, staring down at the water, and hadn't moved in 10 minutes. Now, he turned, his face a cold mask. "My men will not be on the jetty. Lena, they will be on the access bridge and on the water, a containment perimeter." He walked toward me, his eyes locked on mine. "We are maintaining a legal, observable distance. If shooting starts, my men will not fire the first shot. They will not engage. They will only contain. They will block the exits. No one gets off that pier until we are finished." He was keeping his promise to me. No blood in my cafe, but a jetty, apparently, was another matter. "How do you know both parties will be there?" I asked. Ari's thin smile returned. "The North Channel crew is easy. They set the meeting. They are arrogant. They will come." "Mara Keel is the real prize," Luca said. "She's been publicly, spectacularly humiliated. Her career is over unless she can produce a win, a massive win." "So we are giving her one," Ari said, tapping his tablet. "This morning, a disgruntled UIB accountant leaked a file to Keel's most ambitious deputy. It's a detailed, encrypted ledger pointing to a massive, illegal black fund." "The warehouse?" I started. "No," Ari said. "A new one. This ledger belongs to Skylane Holdings, to Mr. Barzini. Keel thinks she's not just coming to arrest a Mafia boss. She thinks she's coming to seize the entire Barzini treasury. She thinks she's about to become the woman who took down the king. I saw the trap now, in all its brutal elegance. But she's coming for you. The North Channel is coming for me, at the same time." "Exactly," Ari said. "Two predators, one piece of bait. They will arrive and find not their target, but their rival. Keel will think North Channel is there as Barzini's muscle. North Channel will think the UIB is there to intercept their payday. They will be armed, paranoid, and pointing fingers at each other, all while standing in the middle of the most advanced recording studio in the city." The weight of it settled on me. I was the one who had to stand in the middle. "You won't be without a script," Ari added, handing me a small, laminated card. On it were 12 short, simple sentences. 1, "It's cold out here." 2, "I've been waiting." 3, "I came alone," just like you asked. "Memorize them," Ari commanded. "They are your cues. Each sentence contains a specific vocal frequency. "It's cold out here" activates the long-range camera on the crane. "I've been waiting" focuses the audio on your position. Each one gives us a new angle, a new feed. You are not just the bait. Lena, you are the director. The rest of the day was a blur of training, but it wasn't Ari who trained me. It was Luca. He took me to the darkest part of the penthouse, the library where the city lights didn't reach. He turned off the lamps. Stand, he ordered. I stood, my arms crossed, shifting my weight. No, you're a target. You are inviting a shot. He stepped into the shadow with me. His hands were on my shoulders, turning me. 30 degrees. Never face an enemy full on. Give them the smallest target possible. Shoulders down. Breathe from your diaphragm. Fear makes you breathe high in your chest. They can see it. Control your breathing. His hands were tactical, impersonal, but they still burned through my shirt. Now walk. I walked across the dark room. Wrong, he said, his voice a low growl of disapproval. You are moving too fast. You are moving like prey. He stood in front of me. When you step from shadow into light, you do it slowly. Let their eyes adjust. Let them see you. You control the reveal. He demonstrated, moving from the blackness into a single sliver of moonlight from the window. He was a ghost. Then he was solid, and it was beautiful. When you move from light back into shadow, he continued, you do it fast. One step, you are gone. Disorient them. Always be where they are not. Always stand where there are 3 ways out. We did this for hours. How to stand, how to walk, how to use the light, how to use the darkness. His hands adjusted my posture. His voice was a constant, low command in my ear. Finally, I stopped. My nerves were raw. Luca. My voice was a thin, reedy sound in the dark. What if it goes wrong? What if the script doesn't work? What if Keel's men don't care about the cameras? What if North Channel just starts shooting the second I step onto the pier? He was silent. He stepped in front of me. So close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. His hands came up, not to my shoulders, but to my face, cupping my jaw. He held me steady, forcing me to meet his gaze in the almost total darkness. Then everything changes, he said, his voice soft, but with an absolute, terrifying finality. If it goes sideways, if you are in danger, only one thing happens. I get you out. I will burn that jetty to the waterline. I will sink every boat in the harbor. But I will get you out. He paused, his thumbs brushing my cheekbones. Ari knows the protocol. Everything else, everything, is replaceable. You are not. The night before the meet, the tension was a wire humming, ready to snap. We weren't in the penthouse. We were at Harbor and Ash. The cafe was dark, closed for the night. The chairs were up on the tables, the espresso machine cold. It was just us, sitting at the counter, the same counter where I had handed him that first coffee. I was stirring a mug of cold water, just for something to do with my hands, the rhythmic tink, tink. Tink of the metal spoon against the ceramic was the only sound. He wasn't speaking. He was just watching me, his gaze intense, as if he were trying to memorize the way my hand moved, the way I nervously bit my lip. He was reading me, like a man reading a declaration of faith he couldn't quite believe was real. The bell on the door chimed, making us both flinch. It was Ari. He didn't speak. He just walked to the counter, placed a small black velvet pouch between us, and left as silently as he had come. I looked at Luca. He nodded. My fingers, trembling slightly, opened the drawstring. I turned the pouch upside down. A single small object fell into my palm. It was a key, an old-fashioned, intricate metallic key, not a key card. What is this? The insurance, Luca said, his voice a whisper in the dark cafe. Our insider at the UIB, the one who gave us the warehouse footage. He's the one who maintains the physical treasury. The one Keel and her friends have been stalking with stolen cash and art. The one she thinks she's protecting. I stared at the key. It was small, but it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. It was the key to the entire conspiracy. This opens it. It opens the vault, Luca confirmed. Keel thinks she's coming to seize my phantom treasury. The North Channel crew thinks they're coming to sell you. They are both wrong. He gently closed my fingers around the key. You are bringing the one thing that can destroy them all. You are bringing the one thing that can burn the whole city down. I slipped the key into the deepest pocket of my jeans, the cold metal pressing against my skin. Iron Hook Jetty was washed in silver. The full moon was so bright it bleached the color from the world, leaving only black shadows and sharp, metallic highlights. The wind didn't just blow, it sliced, coming off the black water of the bay carrying the smell of salt and diesel. It cut right through the high-tech lining of my jacket. I walked out onto the long pier, my boots echoing on the heavy wooden planks. The chip on my lapel was working. I could feel the faint, steady thump-thump against my skin. It wasn't my heartbeat. Mine was a frantic bird in my throat. The fake one was slow, calm, and bait. I reached the center of the pier, a wide-open space with nowhere to hide. Just as the script said, they were early. I heard the rumble of a diesel engine, and a rusted-out pickup truck rolled onto the jetty, its headlights cutting yellow holes in the moonlight. 3 men got out. The bulldog from the cafe, the one Ari had called Lark Venn, was in the lead. He grinned, showing his yellow teeth. He was holding a pair of handcuffs, dangling them from one finger. "Right on time, sweetheart," Venn sneered. "Smart girl. We were worried you'd stand us up. Where's your boyfriend?" "It's cold out here," I said. My voice was tight, but the words were clear. Script line 1. "It's about to get a lot warmer," Venn said, taking a step. He gestured with the cuffs. "Put your hands out. We're taking you to see a friend. She's very interested in compliance." He was interrupted by the smooth, quiet sound of official vehicles. 2 white UIB vans, the same ones from my building, rolled onto the opposite end of the jetty, blocking the only exit. Their doors slid open. Mara Keel stepped out, flanked by 6 agents in tactical vests. She was holding a piece of paper. "Lark Venn," Keel called out, her voice sharp and amplified by the open space. "Cease and desist. You are interfering with a federal investigation." Venn spun around, his face a mask of confusion. "Keel, what the hell is this? This is our party." "Not anymore," Keel snapped, marching forward. "I have a warrant for the arrest of Lena Vo, and another for the seizure of all assets related to the criminal operations of Luca Barzini. You and your men are accessories. Get out of my way." Venn laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "You got no authority here? Which? We're not city cops. We're business." This was the moment they were together. I took a slow breath. "I have been waiting," I said, my voice louder, projecting into the wind. Script line 4. A high, faint whine cut through the wind. A tiny, bright blue light suddenly illuminated the top of a cargo crane across the channel. Both Keel and Venn flinched, looking up. "What is that?" Keel demanded. On the side of the crane, a massive screen flickered to life. Not a screen. I realized. A projection of us. The Nimbus Media logo glowed in the corner. The live stream was active. Keel and Venn were frozen, caught in the sudden, unexpected glare of publicity. They were standing 10 feet apart, with me in the middle. The echo box was live. Keel recovered first. She lowered her voice, trying to turn a public confrontation into a private negotiation. "Venn, don't be a fool," she hissed, taking a step toward him. "Away from me. This is Barzini's trick. He's not here. Give me the girl. She's the witness I need to freeze his accounts. You help me, and I'll forget I ever saw you here." The parabolic mics were perfect. Her whisper was as clear as a shout. Lark Venn spat on the pier. "Forget you saw me, I've got the prize. The girl is my entry ticket. Barzini humiliated me. I'm going to sell her to the UIB. And you're going to pay me for the privilege. Keel. Or maybe I'll just keep her." "You're an idiot," Keel snapped. "You're exposed," Venn countered. They were both distracted, their private war now public. This was my cue. I looked right at the projection on the crane. "I came alone, just like you asked." I called out, "Script line 7. Ari's timing was immaculate. The instant the words left my mouth, every light on the pier died. The floodlights, the safety lamps, the headlights on the UIB vans, everything plunged into total darkness. No, not total. We were still washed in that cold, perfect moonlight. And the cameras, now switched to infrared, were still rolling. "What is this?" Keel screamed. A man from the North Channel crew panicked. He pulled a gun. A single, bright muzzle flash, a gunshot cracked across the water. That was all it took. One of the UIB agents returned fire, aiming not at the man, but at the sound. It was chaos. Men were shouting, scrambling for cover behind their vehicles. They were shooting blind, firing at shadows in the moonlight. I didn't wait. Luca's training took over. I was in the light. I needed to be in shadow. I didn't run. I took 2 fast steps back and sideways, just as he'd taught me. I was out of the line of fire, moving toward the edge of the pier. I kept my body turned, a small target. The bullets were zinging overhead. Wild and terrified, I found the piling I was looking for. A heavy, iron pylon, painted with a white number. 12. Marker 12. Luca's words echoed in my head. Always stand where there are 3 ways out. This was it. A gap in the railing to the water below, a maintenance ladder down the side, and a clear path back to the access bridge. The shooting sputtered and died as fast as it had begun. Men were panting, crouching behind cover, their guns smoking. "Hold your fire! Hold your fire!" Keel was screaming. Into that silence, a new sound, a slow, steady footstep on the wooden planks. He came from the deepest shadow at the base of the pier, where the land met the sea. Luca Barzini. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was in dark pants and a black turtleneck, unarmed, his hands empty at his sides. He walked out into the center of the jetty, into the pure, white moonlight, as if he were taking a stroll. Lark Venn stood up from behind his truck, his gun wavering. "Barzini, I knew you'd come." Luca didn't even look at him. He looked at Mara Keel, who was crouched by her van, her face pale. A public spectacle. "Mara." Luca's voice was quiet, but the wind carried it. The microphones amplified it. It boomed across the water. Then he turned to Lark Venn. Venn raised his pistol. Luca just looked at him. "Choose," Luca said, his voice soft. "Publicly, or justice." Venn hesitated. He looked from Luca's empty hands to the UIB agents, then up at the massive, silent projection of his own face on the crane. He knew. He knew the whole city was watching him point a gun at an unarmed man. His hand trembled. But Keel was finished. She knew it. The ledger, the failed arrest, the gunfire. She was desperate. She saw me, standing by the piling. I was the source of it all. "You!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "This is your fault!" She lunged at me. She wasn't trying to arrest me. She was trying to get me, to grab me, to take the one thing she thought she'd come for. She grabbed the front of my jacket, her nails digging in. My hand was already in my pocket. I grabbed the heavy, cold metal key. As she fumbled at my jacket, trying to find a bag, a recorder, anything, I rammed the key into her hand, closing her own fingers around it. She froze, confused, looking at the object. I leaned in, close to her ear, and spoke the final line. "It belongs to you. Script line 10. The drone, the one I had activated, must have been waiting for this. It dropped from the sky, its motors whining, its lens coming to rest inches from our faces. It zoomed in. A perfect, tight close-up of Mara Keel's hand, her fingers greedily, instinctively closing around the intricate, old-fashioned treasury key. Her expression wasn't confusion anymore. It was recognition. It was raw, unadulterated greed. She knew this key. Luca's voice, calm and final, cut through the night. "Ari, now." On the massive projection, the screen split again. On one side, the infrared footage of the jetty. On the other, the tight close-up of Keel holding the key. And then, a new feed appeared, a website, the official, public database for the Port Garrison Treasury. A link was pasted into the chat of the live stream, visible to everyone. The link led to a secure vault, the one my key opened. A document loaded, scanned pages of the real UIB Black Ledger, the one from the warehouse, the one showing the cash, the art, the extortion money. And at the bottom of the page, the access logs, Vault Access M, Keel, Vault Key Serial Number 48B. The camera zoomed in on the key in her hand, stamped into the metal 48B. Before tens of thousands of live viewers, Mara Keel, caught in infrared, was holding the physical key to the digital evidence of her entire criminal conspiracy. She had been framed, not with a lie, but with the absolute, undeniable truth. She looked at the key in her hand as if it were a snake, and she let out a sound, a low, terrible wail of defeat. She had just locked herself in her own prison. The first sound was a new one, not the frantic city yelp of the UIB or the Port Garrison PD. It was a deep, resonate horn from the water, followed by the thrum of heavy engines. Blue lights, not red, cut across the bay. Independent Harbor Force, Luca said, his voice low. He hadn't moved. Ari's signal. The IHF boats slid against the pilings of the jetty, and disciplined men in dark, functional uniforms swarmed up the ladders. They weren't storming, they were securing. They moved with the cold, efficient purpose of soldiers. Mara Keel didn't even try to run. She was standing frozen, the treasury key still clutched in her white-knuckled fist, her face a hollow mask of ruin. They cuffed her, read her rights in a flat monotone, and led her away. The pop-pop-pop of the Nimbus media flashbulbs trailing her like a new, personal hell. Larkven and his men were not as compliant. They had scrambled for their truck, trying to get back to the bridge. They made it halfway before they stopped. Luca's men, the ones he had promised to keep at a distance, were simply there. They had formed a silent, three-deep wall of black suits at the base of the jetty. They just stood, blocking the only exit. Ven slammed on the brakes, his truck skidding to a stop. He was trapped, not by guns, but by an impassive, unmoving wall of human resolve. The IHF, methodical and calm, walked up the pier and took them into custody, one by one. Just as Luca had promised, no one had fired the first shot. No one on the pier was dead. The wind cut at me, and I started to shiver, the adrenaline leaving my body in a cold rush. My hands were freezing, numb. I was just standing in the middle of the pier, a ghost at the center of a storm that had finally passed. A heavy, dark wool coat was draped over my shoulders. Luca. I hadn't even seen him move. The coat was warm from his body and smelled of cedar and the cold night air. I pulled it around me, my small hands lost in the sleeves. He stood beside me, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel his warmth. He wasn't looking at me. His eyes were scanning the bridge, the water, the rooftops of the distant warehouses. His habit, the reflex of a man who knows he is always a target. On the cargo crane across the water, the massive projection changed. The infrared feed vanished, replaced by the triumphant logo of Nimbus Media. A headline, stark and white, rolled across the bottom. UIB operates Black Fund. Evidence secured at scene. Director Keel arrested. In the distance, from the direction of the Pier 13 walk-ups, a sound like fireworks, I looked and saw it, tiny, bright pinpricks of light rising into the sky. Red, green, white, my neighbors. The ones who had been weeping in the stairwells. They had found the flares left over from the longshoremen's strike, and they were celebrating. They were lighting up the sky. The IHF has frozen all of Calder's assets, Ari's voice said from a comms link on Luca's wrist. The video of him taking cash from a UIB agent, the one from the warehouse feed, was enough. The building is secure. Boss, the eviction orders are void. It was over. My home was safe. Mrs. Petrov was safe. I turned, pulling his big coat tighter around me. He finally looked at me, his eyes dark, the silver moonlight catching the planes of his face. "Is this your victory?" I asked, my voice small, almost lost in the wind. "Or is it ours?" He looked at me for a long, quiet moment, The smallest, faintest smile touched his lips. "It's yours, Lena," he said, his voice so low I had to lean in to hear it. "That free coffee. It just chose the right fire." I took a deep breath, the cold air filling my lungs, clearing my head. This was the moment, the pivot. "I won't be the woman behind you, Luca." His expression didn't change, but his focus intensified. He was listening with his entire body. "I won't be the asset you protect or the secret you keep in a penthouse. If I am with you, if we are this, then I get a voice. I get a choice." I fisted my hands in the sleeves of his coat. "I will not be a liability. I will be a partner." It was a declaration, my own manifesto, delivered on a cold, wet pier with the smell of gunfire still in the air. He didn't hesitate. He didn't need to think. He nodded. A single, sharp, decisive gesture. He raised his right hand and placed it flat against his chest, over his heart. "From this night forward," he said, his voice a raw, binding oath, "every move, every plan, every single thing, it will have your signature on it. Lena, I swear." I believed him. My heart, which had been a cold stone of fear, suddenly felt too big for my chest. I stepped forward, closing the small distance between us, and rose up on my toes. I put my cold hands on his face and I kissed him. It was not a kiss of discovery or of quiet comfort. It was a kiss of sealing. It was raw and desperate and triumphant. It was salty from the sea and the tears that were suddenly, stupidly rolling down my face. He responded instantly, his arms wrapping around me, pulling me off my feet, his mouth claiming mine with a hunger that matched my own. We stood there, wrapped in his coat, kissing in the bright, unforgiving moonlight, in front of the cameras, the IHF, and the entire city. It was a statement, a flag, planted firmly in the ground. A throat being cleared, sharp and polite, broke us apart. Ari was standing there, his tablet in hand, his face as impassive as ever. He had materialized as silently as his boss. "A perfect execution, boss," he said, nodding to me. "Lena." "Thank you. Ari," Luca said, his voice thick. He didn't let me go. "One last note," Ari said, his eyes flicking over the data on his screen. "The UIB vault, Keel's key, the ledger, it all fit, but one piece is wrong." Luca's relaxed, protective posture vanished. He was sharp again. "What?" Ari looked up, his gaze troubled for the first time. The plan was to use our insider to expose Keel, but Keel was already exposed. She was set up by someone else, too. I've been running the logs from the UIB treasury, that vault. It was accessed by a third party 2 hours before our insider gave us the key. A cold dread, heavier than before, settled on me. "What does that mean?" I whispered. Ari looked at Luca. "It means our insider isn't the only ghost. It means someone else is pulling strings. Keel was just a puppet. The question we need to answer," he said, his voice dropping, "is who opened the vault for Keel, who really set this entire stage for her." The implication hung in the cold night air. The war was over. We had won. But a new, invisible traitor was still out there, in the dark. The traitor's name was Soph Vega. The name felt like a betrayal in itself. He wasn't some shadowy rival. He was a quiet, nervous accountant who worked for Skylane Holdings, Luca's primary legitimate front. Ari's deep dive, triggered by the anomaly at the vault, was fast and brutal. Soph had been bleeding information for 6 months, trading small data for cash, building up to the big score, the full treasury codes, which he planned to sell to an independent broker in exchange for a new passport and a life in Dubai. But the worst part, the part that made my skin crawl and my stomach clench, was how he'd watched me. "The breach wasn't at the penthouse, or in your apartment, Lena," Ari had told me, his face grim. "It was at the cafe." He'd placed a listening device, a high-frequency transmitter, inside the casing of the big industrial coffee grinder at Harbor and Ash. The needle hadn't just been near me. It had been planted in the very heart of my safe space. All those mornings, the comforting, loud roar of the machine grinding beans had been the exact same sound covering the transmission of my conversations, my fears, and my plans to Soph Vega's receiver. He knew I was the link to Luca. The plan to catch him was named, fittingly, Midnight Roast. Soph had arranged his final exchange the memory card with Luca's data for his passport at a neutral, public location. His choice harbor, an ash, after hours. He thought it would be empty, quiet, poetic. He was wrong. When Soph Vega walked in, the cafe was half full. It was dimly lit, warm, smelling of coffee and steamed milk. A couple in a corner booth was laughing quietly. A longshoreman in a heavy coat was reading a newspaper at the counter. 2 women were sharing a pastry by the window. They were all Luca's people. They were all IHF, undercover. The cafe wasn't a meeting spot, it was a theater. I was behind the counter, wearing my apron. It felt strange, like putting on an old, familiar skin. Soph saw me and froze. "Lena, what are you doing here? It's late." "We're trying a new late-night menu," I said, my voice smooth. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs. "Can I get you something, a Lena blend?" I slid a bag of the coffee I had named my coffee across the counter toward him. His eyes darted to the bag, then to my face. He was sweating. His contact. One of Ari's men was sitting in the back booth, waiting. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. "Meant only for him. It's a special roast, for people who can't sleep." I pushed the bag closer. "Don't trade the smell of fresh coffee for the smell of dirty money. Soph, it never washes off." "Panic, pure animal panic." His eyes went wide. He knew. He abandoned his contact. He fumbled inside his jacket, pulling out a tiny, black memory card. He was going to swallow it. He raised it to his mouth. "Soph, no!" I yelled. But I didn't move. Instead, I slammed my hand down on the button for the other grinder, the prop, the one Ari's team had installed, fitted with a theatrical sound effect. The sound that erupted wasn't a grind, it was a mechanical roar, a deafening shriek of metal on metal, amplified by tiny speakers. Soph screamed, startled by the violent noise, and dropped the memory card. It skittered across the floor tiles. In the same second, Ari, disguised as the longshoreman at the counter, stumbled in surprise. His entire cup of steaming hot water went flying, not at Soph, but onto the floor between them. A cloud of scalding steam erupted, a perfect, 3-second wall of white fog. It was all the time Luca needed. He moved from the corner booth where he'd been sitting with his back to the room. He wasn't a man, he was a shadow. Before the steam had cleared, before Soph could even bend his knees to retrieve the card, Luca was on him. There was no punch, no violence, just a quiet, precise movement. Luca's hand closed over Soph's wrist, locking it in a grip of dark, brushed steel. The IHF agents at the tables stood up, their guns appearing in their hands. The couple by the window, now on their feet, were already cuffing Soph. It was clean. It was silent. It was over. And, as if on cue, the other customers in the cafe burst into applause, as if we had just concluded the most brilliant magic trick. Soph looked around, his face a mask of utter confusion and defeat. He had been the final piece, the glue, UIB, Calder, North Channel, and now, him. The entire rotten structure had come down. After the IHF led him away, after I signed my final statement, we went home, to the penthouse. The city lights were blurred, a soft, steady rain was falling, washing the windows clean. We stood by the glass, not speaking, just listening to the sound of the rain and our own breathing. He took my hand, his fingers lacing with mine. I turned, and he was there. I leaned my back against the solid, cool wall, and he kissed me. It was a long, slow kiss, and it held everything. The fear, the victory, the exhaustion, and the promise. It was a kiss that had been earned. My hands, which had been clutching the key to a treasury, now clutched the lapels of his jacket. His hands were in my hair. on my back, holding me as if I were the only solid thing in the world. Slowly, consensually, layer by layer, the defenses we had both worn for so long began to fall away. His jacket landed on a chair. My coat was a pool on the floor. His hands were warm on my skin. My blouse was a whisper of fabric on the doorknob. There was no rush. There was only the sound of the rain and the quiet, steady murmur of agreement as we moved from the window. When we reached the edge of the bed, we stopped. He leaned his forehead against mine, his eyes closed, his arms wrapped around me, holding me so tightly I felt like I could finally let go. "Tomorrow morning," he whispered, his voice rough. "We'll have coffee, with no fear." We just stood there, holding on, letting the fire burn in our hearts and our minds, content to let the storm finally, truly pass. The next morning, Harbor and Ash opened on time, but there was a new sign in the window. It was thick, laminated, and official. It read, "Safe Zone. This establishment is under the protection of the Port Garrison Independent Harbor Force. No fees, no evictions." Below it was the IHF's official seal. The news was everywhere. The UIB was being investigated at the federal level. The North Channel crew, with its head cut off and its money laundering operation exposed, dissolved like salt in water. And the funds seized from Kiel's treasury, they were used to establish the new Pier 13 Community Library. That afternoon, I walked into Luca's office. He was on the phone, his voice sharp. He looked up, and his entire expression softened. He hung up. I walked to his desk. I placed the stack of Calder's debt papers, the ones he had bought, in front of him. He looked at them, then at me. "That's not me," I said. "I am not your debt." I slid another piece of paper across the desk. It was a new contract, one I had drafted myself, with the help of Ari's non-existent legal team. The letterhead read Port Garrison Renewal Partnership. "This," I said, tapping the signature line, "is me." He read it. He looked up at me, and that rare, genuine smile touched his face. He picked up his pen and signed, "Partner." He leaned back, picking up his Americano. I picked up my own mug, filled with the Lena blend. He raised his cup. I raised mine. The sound of the two ceramic mugs tapping together was a small, clear chime. It sounded like a wedding bell, not in a hurry to ring. I smiled, taking a sip. "That free coffee," I whispered, "ended up being pretty expensive." Luca watched me over the rim of his cup, his eyes full of a warmth that was just for me. "It was," he agreed, "expensive enough to buy your freedom and my heart." High above the city, a Nimbus media drone, one that was never meant for broadcast, hovered. It silently recorded a scene not meant for the public two people, standing on a rooftop looking out at a city that was, for the first time, a little less afraid. Down on the street, parked in their perfect, silent line, the 4 black SUVs waited. They were no longer a cage. They were an escort. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where in the world you are listening from. So please leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and like this video. It would also mean the world to me if you would support us by hitting that hype button, so this story can be heard by even more people.